everyone. My name is Wendy Swire. I am the former co-president of CRCMC, as well as being one of the founders of the organization many years ago. I am really excited to speak with you today on Workshop Wednesday. And my topic is one about trust and conversational intelligence. So it's a topic, and I'm an executive coach, a mediator, a leadership consultant, and I've been in this field for a long time. Over 20 years. And I'm excited to be sharing with you some best practices that I've learned about something called conversational intelligence. So the first thing I want you to think about, we're going to talk about how do you build trust? How can you actually build trust through conversations? That's what we're going to talk about today. So I'm going to get ready and share my screen. Here it comes. And as I'm doing that, I want you to think about the whole concept of trust. And here's my contact information, and you'll be able to find me. You just Google Wendy Swire. And I hope this is finding you nice and safe in a good place. So my first question is, my first activity, and again, we're not together and we're not live, but I'd love for you to just write down a positive word that comes to mind. First word that comes to your mind. And I want you to notice how you feel when you wrote that down. It could be family, could be the name of a pet, it could be joy, it could be anything. But how are you feeling right now? That's because words create worlds. And I'm going to come back to that in a few minutes. So here's what we're going to do in our Workshop Wednesday today. I am going to combine the field of brain science in also with conversations, how you have conversations and how you build trust. It's a kind of a cutting edge new field, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. We're going to talk about positive conversations and what happens in your brain when you're actually in those conversations. And then I'm going to teach you something called the CIQ dashboard, and you'll be able to apply it immediately. My first hack, though, that I want to recommend, I've been involved in the field of neuroscience since about 2009. The first hack I want to give you is if during this Workshop Wednesday, something really resonates with you, take notes. I know it's hard. You might be multitasking, maybe checking email, maybe playing a video game on your phone. But if you really want to increase and use your brain power, there's the best way to do this is come from a gentleman named Jim Quick of Quick Brain. He says on one side, take a piece of paper, divide it in half, take notes, what you've learned, but the key to really apply learning is making meaning from it. Why is what I'm talking about meaningful for you? How can you apply it? That's where the real magic happens in your brain. And again, if I've got parents, educators, anyone who's watching this Workshop Wednesday, this is a great neuro hack to share with other people. So again, take notes, but also what are you taking away from this? So the first thing I want to do is just tell you a quick story. How did I get interested in brain science? I'm not a neuroscientist. I'm not a psychologist. Well, I fell in love in the brain with brain science in 2007 when I was taking a learning program, just like you're doing now, just kind of watching this webinar, this series. And I started to learn about the brain in a class, and I just got fascinated. I got really fascinated, and I just wanted to learn more and more and more. So since 2009, I started the DC Neuroleadership Group, which is a study salon everyone is invited to, just so you can learn about your brain, which is just the most amazing organ in the world. And here I am actually with the human brain at the DC Neuroleadership Group. And the thing that I want to stress is that all the techniques and everything that I'm going to share with you today are things that I use myself, that I have used to improve conversations, I've used in conflict, I've used to improve relationships. So let me tell you a little bit about the human brain. This right here. It actually weighs about 3 to 5 pounds, about 4 to 5 pounds. And it actually, if you see those pictures and you say, does it really look like that? Yes, it really kind of feels like tofu, very, very spongy. Now, what's so interesting about the human brain is that it's only 3 to 5% of your body, but it consumes 20 to 25% of the oxygen and glucose you consume. Why is that important? Your brain is just constantly working and it needs to be fed. That's why you get tired at 3 o'clock or in the afternoon, because you've been working so hard. So you've got to feed your brain. And by the way, this is a fun fact. Your brain is more active when you're sleeping than when you're awake. So this brain is the most sophisticated information transfer system on the planet. There is nothing more powerful than your human brain. And once you understand that, you can really start to utilize it for your own benefit. So I'm going to talk a little bit, I'm interested in the brain and we'll come back to the brain, but the real heart of today's Wednesday workshop is the topic of trust. Take a minute and think about, how do you build trust? What is your definition of trust? Do you have one? How do you build trust? As a mediator, got mediators and conflict resolution professionals with me today. As a family member, as a friend, do people have to earn trust before you give your trust? How do you create trust? Is a trust a subject that we even talk about? So interesting about trust is, one of my favorite quotes on trust is that trust is like the air we breathe. When it's present, nobody notices, but when it's absent, everybody notices. So how can we increase trust in our families, in the work we do in conflict resolution, in our workplaces? And what can that brain science and conversational intelligence inform us about it? So let's take a quick look at some definitions of trust. That in and of itself is really interesting. First one comes from a colleague of mine, Casey Wilson, and he says it's the acknowledgement. It's the acknowledgement of these attitudes and values and needs. Well, I then went and I looked at the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, which is a really kind of cool resource. And it says, no, trust is actually an attitude. It's not an acknowledgement, it's an attitude we have towards people we hope to trust. And then to be trustworthy is actually a property. So that gets kind of detailed. Well, Stephen Covey, the very well-known author, he says actually trust is like a dividend account. It's like an interest, a bank account, that if you have distrust, it taxes individuals. But if you have trust, it's almost like it pays out dividends. But we know that trust is critical in all of our conversations. So how do we increase it? Well, let's jump back to our brain science piece and say, it's really important to say, were we born, like, was the evolution of our brain, were we kind of born to have trust? Why should we trust other people? Does it even make sense? Well, actually it does. It has really, really deep, powerful neurobiological and evolutionary roots that we trust people. Trust is in the best interests of human beings. So we were kind of cavemen back there, cave women, long time ago. We really needed to trust other individuals. So trust is hardwired in our brain. We're hardwired to trust. Now, what's so interesting about the human brain, and here again, here's just a picture and evolution of what it looks like, is that our ancestor brains and bodies were designed to do some amazing things, okay? But what's interesting is the human brain really hasn't changed since, we've been around the planet. We've been hominins for about 2 million years, but modern day Homo sapiens, we're only 200,000 years old. Not much has changed in our brains in the last 200,000 years. And we were meant in our human brains to do a couple things. And this is a great book talking about the development of the human brain. We were intended to do the following. We were really learned to have a finely tuned sense of threat. So if there's a threat, you just learn to avoid threats and approach opportunities. Our brain is designed to do that. It's designed to trust, but if it senses a threat, you stay away from it. And guess what's so interesting in the human brain? It takes only 250 milliseconds to determine if someone is trustworthy. And less time it takes to blink an eye, you've already made that determination. Do I trust that other person or do I not trust them? That is that primitive brain in action. So what conversational intelligence, and that's the model I'm going to teach you today. I'm going to teach you talk to you about this dashboard. What that does is take some of this basic brain science that we have threats and we have rewards, but we're hardwired for trust, and it really puts it in a framework of 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 having better conversations. It's the work of Judith Glaser, a best-selling author, an executive coach. She was a mentor of mine, and I, really enjoyed studying with her. And in the spirit of true confession, I got to know her and meet her. And there's her and her husband, Rich. And she passed away sadly. She came and spoke to my DC Neuroleadership group, which you're all invited to. She passed away about 2 years ago, but she was an inspiration to people in the coaching, leadership consulting, conflict world because of her pioneering work. So it takes milliseconds, zero point 0.7 seconds for your brain to get into that primitive state. And what's interesting is if we know conversations are so important to build trust, you know what happens? Only 9 out of 10 conversations really meet the mark. Most conversations are not building trust. They're not even that effective, according to research. So we're really not using our daily conversations effectively. And that's one thing that we're trying to do in this model. So here's a slide, and here's to get a sense of your brain. We've talked a little bit about that brain. You actually have some other brains that really help you build trust. You have a gut brain and a heart brain, and then you have 4 different brain systems. I think this is so fascinating. This is fairly new research. You actually have neurons and wisdom in your heart, as well as in your gut brain axis. So again, I always tell people I'm in presentations or clients that I'm working with, I always learn to trust your gut, listen to it because it has got some wisdom there. So in these 6 brains, so now kind of back to the head brain, you really do need to know that you have this very complicated system working all the time to take in information and make decisions about what I should do, what I should say, how I should feel. But we really do operate. Take a look down there. Often we are very much in our primitive brain. Let me get a little laser pointer here. See if I can get that for everybody. You really do operate so much of the time in this primitive brain system, which we share with reptiles and other it's called the reptile. It's really where our reactive brain is. But to trust other people, you really need to be in that more human part of the brain known as the prefrontal cortex. It's kind of right up here. So it's hard when you're feeling distrust. It's really hard. You're in this lower brain system and you want to move to a higher brain system, which is right up here. Again, hardwired in our brains. We're designed to do that, as I showed you in that earlier slide. So here's what I was just saying. Trust is down here in that lower brain system. I mean, trust is in the higher brain system and distrust is in that lower brain system. So I've thrown out a lot of science at you. Why does it matter? Why should I know where trust is? Well, if you know what's happening, you can also understand that you also have powerful chemicals in your brain that support whether you feel trust or distrust. You have the most powerful drugstore in your brain. Take every Rite Aid, CVS, Walgreens on the planet, and nothing is more powerful than these neurotransmitters that support brain function. And some of them are more highly activated when you're not feeling trustworthy. When you say, I don't know, I can trust that person, I don't like them, something's going on, you're going to have different chemicals than if you actually feel, hey, I can work with them, can partner with them, I have some trust. And again, how you feel will either upregulate the chemicals of trust or downregulate. What we know from conversational intelligence is the words you actually say will not only create worlds, but they'll also create different neurochemicals. So if I say words like, no, you can't do it, it was a bad idea, I'm disappointed, you never can get it right, you're going to feel a lot of negative, those neurotransmitters and neurochemicals of stress, cortisol, adrenaline. If I say, we can do it, I trust you, I believe in you. Yes, yes, it is possible. You're going to have different chemicals. You're going to have less cortisol and you're going to have more dopamine, more serotonin. Even the words you say will affect your neurochemistry and your brain function. I think that's just fascinating. I hope you think it's fascinating too. So here's the definition from Judith Glaser. Take a look. I won't read it out loud, but the cool thing about this ability to understand what's happening in your brain, it's hardwired. We all have that in our brain. And again, once you understand that certain conversations will activate these trust and distrust networks in the brain, you can improve conversations, business results. You just can work with people differently in the world. So let's talk a little bit about what are this upregulation and downregulation. And that's really how we talk about it in conversation intelligence. Are you upregulating the neurochemicals of transparency, relationship building, empathy, or are you really or are you upregulating the words of fear and uncertainty and being right? We talk a lot in conversational intelligence about something called being addicted to being right. When you're working with someone who has to, or someone, have a family member who has to be right all the time, it's going to put you in a place where you are down regulating those positive neurochemicals. You're not in this part of the brain. You're way back there in that reptile brain. It's hard to when you think, you're working with someone who just makes you feel nervous or uncertain, or they always have to be the smartest person in the room. Hard to build trust in those situations. And do you know someone like that? You might know more than one person like that, I'm sure. So here's more of the technical terms. Words will activate your neurochemistry. So remember that first exercise I had you did? Think of a positive word. Come back to that word right now. For me, it could be family, chocolate. I could be thinking about words like appreciation. I am actually, as I say those words and think about those thoughts, I am actually increasing oxytocin, dopamine, serotonin, and GABA. These are very powerful. Remember that powerful CVS in your brain? This will make me feel calmer, connected, makes you feel good. And when you're in that place of stress and someone, you can't do it, what's the matter? Why don't you do this? You're increasing arousal and stress. Cortisol, very powerful neurochemical. Adrenaline, noradrenaline. It's happening to you right now as I'm speaking, happens every day in every conversation that you are in. Let's take a look at cortisol. This is the chemical property of cortisol. And again, I put that negative cocktail that's meant to be. It's a negative cocktail, and it's a really powerful, powerful neurochemical. Let me tell you a little bit about cortisol. I want you to think of cortisol as your nature's built-in alarm system. It's the main chemical that pumps out when your body is under stress. It's a steroid hormone. It's very powerful. And it is released all over your blood. I mean, it just goes through your body. I think a lot of us living in COVID with the news cycle, kind of what the state of the world is, there's a lot of cortisol. It is a chemical that you're feeling of stress, and it's not meant to stay in your body a long time. This is one of my favorite authors, and kind of he's fascinating out of Stanford University, Robert Sapolsky. I mean, he says the following. He says, human beings, we weren't meant to kind of live in this 24-hour news cycle where there's chronic stress and we weren't meant to do that. We were not meant to have this much cortisol in our bodies and in our brains, but that's what's happening right now. So the last thing I kind of want to share with you is what we call the conversational dashboard. And this is a really, really nice practical tool that kind of brings everything together of what I've said. So let me walk you through it because there's a lot here on this slide. The first is take a look at just low trust, high trust. Low trust, we know, is in those deeper, more primitive brain regions. High trust is going to be in your more human part of your brain, your cortex, right? When you're in that low trust part of your brain with somebody, you're very skeptical. You resist what you say. You tune out. Have you ever been listening to someone talking and you don't trust them, and you resist, you don't even pay attention? That's a low trust state, very low trust. This is where people, let me tell you what you have to do. When you're in this kind of low trust, you'll also get, if you're working with people, or this could even be you, kind of addicted to being right. It's very transactional. As you move up this dashboard and you know somebody, you've worked with them for a while, it could be a family, family members we hope you have higher trust with. Sometimes you don't. But, just somebody, it's very conditional trust. Like, I trust that you'll respond to my email, and I trust you, but it's very much a kind of give and take, positional, a lot of, let me convince the other person. Let me convince you why I'm right, and I'll listen to you, and let me tell you what my view is. And most conversations in my professional world that I've seen are really stuck in that kind of yellow conditional trust. It's not bad, it's not the worst, but that's where most people are. But if you really want to create and be innovative and partner and work beyond conflict and get to a place where you can have higher trust, that's that green portion here. That's where you can co-create and experiment. These we call level 3 conversations. And what's happening is that when you're here, this part of the brain, in a level 3 higher trust conversation, you produce more oxytocin, more dopamine. It feels good. Doesn't it feel good to be in those conversations where you really can relate to people? These transmitters make you feel relaxed. You feel open to others. You also have more empathy towards other people and better judgment. So you can connect to people at just a much deeper level when you are in that part of your brain, and there is that dopamine and serotonin and GABA. And that's where we really want you to get to. So this is another way of looking at the dashboard. And what's really nice here is you can see level 1, I kind of tell you and you respond, kind of low trust. Advocacy and inquiry is level 2, but level 3 is where you're really sharing, and you really are not just thinking about yourself and protecting yourself. You've moved from I to we. Let me repeat that. You've moved from I to we. And that's what we want in more of our conversations. And one of the keys is, how are you listening? Are you listening to connect, or are you listening to show why you're right? Are you listening to really try to build these barriers, or do you have to listen to share and direct people and tell them what to do? When you are in level 2 or level 3, it's much more about the questions you're asking. And for my mediators on listening to this, the power of those open-ended questions that we ask in mediation and how it can open up people and start to build trust. This is known as the conversational dashboard. So let's take a minute here, and although we're not together, you can do this exercise. What are some key words or phrases that create distrust for you? They really kind of spike up your cortisol. And then what are those words that create trust for you or for people that you work with? I know in my husband's case, I've been married a long time, the word should really bothers him. Should is a word that's a trigger, it really just upsets him. It creates a lot of distrust. It doesn't bother me, right? But words like should or have to, again, can really, you have to be paying attention, but sort of notice the words that affect you and your own neurochemicals. When I hear people say, we can do this together, or I believe in you, things like that really give me a lot of oxytocin. So again, here's another quote from Judith Glaser. If you want to have great organizations, great teams, great families, depends on the quality of your relationships, and that depends on the quality of your conversations. Everything comes back to conversations, one conversation at a time. And again, for those who are working in organizations, when you have trust, you have greater engagement, and you definitely have better performance. So it really is, there's a lot written now about how do you build trust, how do you do it in virtual environments. Really important that you start to think about the quality of your conversations, what you're saying, the words you're using. So some of the key takeaways to get better at conversational intelligence include asking those open-ended questions, questions for which you don't have answers, listening to connect with people, really listen to people on a deep level, not to show that you're wrong, not to show that you're right. Just, I want to listen to understand. The third thing is think about the words that you are using, the specific words. Do they trigger people? Do they have a reaction? How do you feel? What neurochemical state are you putting people in, even in the words you're using? So that's really important. Um, can you play? Can you change your words? What are you doing to move along that conversational dashboard? Those are some of the techniques that are used in this approach. So this is the work of Dr. Paul Zak. He's really interesting. And then we're going to move into their kind of final part of our workshop Wednesday today. He wanted to find out, he's a researcher, and he said, why do people trust in the first place? Like, what even builds trust? So he said, we know that there's been experiments from around the world that individuals, humans, are inclined to trust each other, but some don't. So Zak, this gentleman, Dr. Paul Zak, actually wanted to find the neurological signals that indicate when we should trust somebody. And he looked at oxytocin. Oxytocin, it's known as like the cuddle hormone, but he says when there's that oxytocin, it's okay to trust others. That was his research hypothesis. So he put people in experiments, he put people in games, he did a whole bunch of stuff. And what he would do, this is so interesting, this is before COVID, obviously, he would draw their blood, and then he would see, before they put him in games, and they're kind of like, they call them stranger games in the in psychology, that they would have you in one room and someone else in another room. And, you'll both be on computers and you'll have to decide, should I send, $3 to $5 to a stranger? And what happens is, if I send it, will they send the money? Their money doubles. Will they send it back to me? So it's a sort of puzzle. What would happen? So they played a lot of games involving money and whether people would share the money. And what happened is, this Dr. Zak he drew blood before and after people made decisions. And what he found, and he drew blood from both the sender and the receiver. And what he found is that people who had more of this oxytocin were more likely to show trustworthy behavior in these games, in these experiments. And he could actually correlate. If you had more of this oxytocin, you were more likely to cooperate. And he also, so just wanted, and then he actually would give people oxytocin. And I want to assure you it was safe. It was a nasal spray. Don't worry. But he would do that. And then he compared if people had this additional oxytocin versus a placebo. He gave people 42 IUs of synthetic oxytocin, and that doubled the amount of money that they would share or trust. And he ran these tests in different companies. He ran it all over the world. What I love is that he actually went to the rainforest of Papua New Guinea to make sure. And he found out you know what? You got more of this, you're more likely to trust. So really interesting. There is a chemical behind trust. And I do think there's things that we can do. So to review, I think you've learned a little bit about the chemicals of conversations today, where trust resides in the brain. You learned about the dashboard and the importance of words. So the next most important thing to do is, what's your biggest takeaway from today? How will you immediately apply this? Remember that note taking? How are you going to apply what you just learned? How do you apply it to yourself? How do you apply it to others? How can you use this information? Why is it important to you? And then finally, how are you going to share it with somebody? How can you actually share this information with somebody else? That's really, really important. So before I wind up my workshop Wednesday with you, I want to share with you one of my favorite quotes about trust. Comes from J.K. Rowling, who we know is the author of the wonderful Harry Potter series that many of us read or read to our kids or, were just read frequently. And what J.K. Rowling says is the following. She says, never trust anything that can think for itself if you can't see where it keeps its brains. So I hope you've enjoyed this Workshop Wednesday. Please keep in touch. If you're interested in learning more about the DC Neuro Leadership Group, here's how you can find me. It's available to everybody. Anyone can enjoy it and can attend. I'm going to stop sharing now. Anyone can attend the DC Neuro Leadership Group. We're open to everybody. We're a learning salon here. Now we're virtual. I just want you to go forth and remember your words are so powerful. They can increase cortisol or they can increase oxytocin. So keep on doing what you're doing. Keep supporting CRICMIC in these wonderful Workshop Wednesdays where you're learning key critical skills from experts. And I've so enjoyed spending this last, 40 minutes with you talking about brain, conversational intelligence, and how you can make a difference in this world. So thank you so much and be well.